In the summer of 1976, a Lotus engineer named Peter Wright was sitting in a wind tunnel at Imperial College London watching something that should not have been happening. The model in front of him was a simplified cross-section of a racing car underfloor. The numbers coming off the pressure sensors were wrong. Not wrong in the sense of equipment malfunction, wrong in the sense that the downforce being generated by the shape beneath the car was 4 times larger than any aerodynamic calculation of that era predicted it should be. Wright stared at the numbers. He ran the test again. The numbers did not change. He picked up the phone and called Colin Chapman. By the time you understand what happened between that phone call and the 1978 Italian Grand Prix at Monza, you will understand the single most consequential aerodynamic discovery in the history of Formula One and why the sport spent the following 6 years trying to contain what Chapman had unleashed. This is the story of ground effect. Not the concept as it is taught today in motorsport engineering courses, but the specific sequence of decisions, accidents, rivalries, and regulatory failures that turned a pressure sensor anomaly in a London wind tunnel into a technology that won 3 consecutive Constructors' Championships, killed 2 drivers, and forced the FIA to rewrite the technical regulations in a manner so severe that the effects are still visible in every Formula One car racing today. To understand what Wright found, you need to understand the state of Formula One aerodynamics in 1976. The discipline was a decade old in any serious sense. Jim Hall's Chaparral program in the United States had demonstrated that downforce was possible and useful. Colin Chapman himself had introduced the first high-mounted rear wing on the Lotus 49 in 1968. By 1976, every team on the grid was running wings, front and rear, generating downforce by the same principle as an aircraft wing in reverse. The air flowing over the curved upper surface of a conventional wing moves faster than the air beneath it, creating low pressure above and high pressure below, which lifts the wing upward. Invert the wing and mount it on a racing car, and the same physics pushes the car downward into the track. Simple, understood, and by 1976, approaching its limits. Every team had wings. Every team's wings were getting larger and less efficient. The aerodynamic gains from incremental wing development were diminishing. Chapman, who had understood aerodynamics more instinctively than any other constructor of his generation, had been looking for something else. What Wright had found was not a new principle. It was a known fluid dynamics phenomenon called the Venturi effect, named after the 18th century Italian physicist Giovanni Venturi, who had observed that when a fluid passes through a constriction, a narrowing channel, its velocity increases and its pressure drops. Chapman understood immediately what the wind tunnel numbers meant. The underside of a racing car running close to the track surface could be shaped into a Venturi profile. The gap between the floor of the car and the road surface was the constriction. Air entering the front of that gap would accelerate as it passed through the narrowing channel. Its pressure would drop dramatically, and the differential between that low pressure zone beneath the car and the atmospheric pressure above it would generate downforce, not from a wing bolted to the top of the car, but from the entire underfloor surface. The numbers Wright was looking at suggested that a properly shaped underfloor could generate more downforce than all the wings on a contemporary Formula One car combined, and it could do so with a fraction of the aerodynamic drag that conventional wings produced. Less drag meant more straight-line speed. More downforce meant faster corners. In aerodynamic engineering terms, the ratio of downforce to drag, the efficiency metric that defines how much grip a given amount of speed penalty buys you, was about to improve by an order of magnitude. Stay with this because the engineering challenge that followed is the part that most accounts of ground effect skip over. Generating downforce from an underfloor was conceptually straightforward once Wright had the wind tunnel data. The problem was containment. For the Venturi effect to function beneath the car, the low-pressure zone had to be sealed. Air leaking in from the sides of the car would equalize the pressure differential and destroy the downforce. Chapman's solution was the side skirt, a flexible seal running along the bottom edge of the car's side pods, maintaining contact with the track surface as the car moved. In theory, this was elegant. In practice, it required a suspension system rigid enough to keep the skirts in consistent contact with the road at racing speeds on circuits with surface irregularities through corners, generating lateral loads that no Formula One suspension had previously been designed to manage. The car that would eventually incorporate all of this, the Lotus 78, began development in 1976 and raced for the first time in January 1977 at the Argentine Grand Prix. It was faster than anything else on the circuit. Its drivers, Mario Andretti and Gunnar Nilsson, reported a sensation that no racing driver had previously described. The car did not feel like it was being pushed into the road. It felt, in Andretti's words, as if the road were being pulled up to meet the car. The 1977 season produced enough data to confirm what Chapman had found. Andretti won 4 races. The car's cornering speeds on fast circuits were, by contemporary timing measurements, between 8 and 12% higher than the next fastest competitor through the same corners. The rivals had no explanation. The Lotus 78 side pods were shaped differently, longer, lower, with an unusual profile, but without access to the wind tunnel data, no one outside Lotus could determine why. Bernie Ecclestone, whose Brabham team was among the most technically sophisticated on the grid, reportedly instructed his engineers to acquire photographs of the Lotus underfloor by any means available. The photographs, when obtained, showed nothing obviously revolutionary. The genius was in the invisible gap beneath the car, in the pressure distribution that could only be measured, not seen. Chapman, meanwhile, had already concluded that the Lotus 78 was a compromise. The car's suspension, still a conventional double wishbone arrangement, was too soft to keep the skirts in perfect contact with the track at the lateral loads ground effect cornering was now generating. The aerodynamic platform was moving. The downforce was inconsistent. For 1978, Chapman's team produced the Lotus 79, a car designed from first principles around the ground effect concept rather than adapted to accommodate it. The underfloor tunnels were deeper and more precisely profiled. The suspension was stiffened to the point where drivers reported feeling every surface imperfection in the circuit directly through the chassis. The side skirts were refined. The total downforce figure generated at racing speed, never officially published by Lotus but subsequently reconstructed by aerodynamic engineers studying contemporary tire data, is estimated to have been in the range of 1,800 kilograms at 250 kilometers per hour. The car weighed 595 kilograms. At speed, the aerodynamic load pressing the Lotus 79 into the track was 3 times its own weight. Mario Andretti won the 1978 World Championship. He won 6 races. Ronnie Peterson, his teammate, won 2 more. The Constructors' Championship was not a contest. Brabham, Ferrari, and Tyrrell finished the season trying to understand what they were looking at. By the end of the year, every aerodynamicist in Formula One had reached the same conclusion. The Lotus 79 was not an incrementally better racing car, it was a different category of machine. By 1979, the entire grid was attempting to incorporate ground effect principles. Williams produced the FW07, which proved faster than the Lotus in race trim. Brabham, Ferrari, Ligier, every team that had the engineering resource committed to ground effect development. The performance escalation was vertical. Cornering speeds at circuits like Silverstone and the Oostenrijkring increased by margins that the circuit designers had not anticipated and the barriers had not been built to contain. At the 1979 Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort, the fastest corner speeds recorded were calculated to be generating lateral forces in excess of 4G on the drivers. For reference, a Formula One driver in 1973 experienced approximately 2G in a fast corner. The aerodynamic revolution had doubled the physical load on a human body in the space of 2 years. The regulation response came in stages, each one revealing how poorly the sport's governing body understood what it was attempting to control. Skirts were banned for 1981. Teams responded by lowering the entire car on its suspension, maintaining the ground clearance seal through chassis proximity to the track rather than flexible devices. The FIA mandated a minimum ride height of 6 centimeters. Teams complied on paper and used hydraulic suspension systems to lower the car to legal height in the weighbridge, then lower it further on the circuit. The term used for this practice in the paddock was, without irony, qualifying suspension. The FIA introduced a flat underfloor regulation for 1983, requiring that the area between the front and rear axles be a flat horizontal plane. The shaped underfloor tunnels that had defined the ground effect era were abolished. The regulation was enforced. The performance era it ended had lasted 6 seasons, produced 4 different constructors' champions, and permanently altered the relationship between Formula One cars and the track surfaces beneath them. What it had also produced was a hazard that the aerodynamic performance had been obscuring. Ground effect cars required suspension so stiff that the drivers were effectively sitting in rigid platforms at racing speed. When the downforce was functioning correctly, the grip was extraordinary. When it failed, when a skirt stuck in the raised position, when a curb disrupted the seal, when the car moved outside the designed aerodynamic window, the loss of downforce was instantaneous and total. Not gradual, as conventional aerodynamic loss tends to be, instantaneous. A car generating 1,800 kilograms of downforce one moment and 400 kilograms the next on a suspension too stiff to accommodate the transition through mechanical grip alone would snap into a handling condition that no driver had time to respond to. The accidents that resulted from ground effect failure were different in character from anything the sport had previously seen. They were not the consequence of driver error or mechanical failure in the conventional sense. They were the consequence of an aerodynamic system operating beyond the limits that human reaction time could manage. Gilles Villeneuve died at Zolder in May 1982. Didier Pironi suffered career-ending leg injuries at Hockenheim 3 months later. Riccardo Paletti died at Montreal that same summer. The causes were not identical, but the era had established a new relationship between performance and fragility that the regulations were attempting, with partial success, to address. The flat floor regulation of 1983 did not end downforce from the underfloor. It defined it. The diffuser, the rearward expansion of the underbody that accelerates airflow beneath the car and then diffuses it back to atmospheric pressure, remained legal. Teams spent the following 3 decades finding every available means to generate downforce from the surfaces the regulations permitted. The V-shaped underfloors of the 2022 ground effect era, which returned regulated underfloor tunnels to Formula One for the first time since 1982, are the direct descendants of what Peter Wright measured in a London wind tunnel in 1976. The engineers who designed them grew up studying the Lotus 78 and the Lotus 79. The regulations that constrained them were written by people who remember what happened when they were not. At Monza in September 1978, Mario Andretti crossed the finish line to win the Italian Grand Prix and secure the World Championship. His teammate Ronnie Peterson had been airlifted to hospital that morning following a starting grid accident that would prove fatal. The victory ceremony was muted. Andretti stood on the podium of a race won by a car that had changed Formula One permanently on a day defined by the cost that speed always carries. Colin Chapman wept in the garage. He had built the fastest racing car in the world. He understood by then exactly what he had done. If this kind of engineering history is what you came for, subscribe. It costs nothing and it keeps this channel producing the stories that don't make the highlights packages. Leave a comment. Was the ground effect era the greatest leap in Formula One engineering or the most reckless? Next time, we go inside the machine that took everything ground effect had built and pushed it one step further than the regulations would allow.